Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen Carpenter. With me is my partner, co-host, and father, Brandon. But before we get started, for those of you on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. You can shut off that notification bell if you want. Facebook, like, comment, share. And on all platforms, spread the word to your friends. And now to the opening notes. This week's discussion was it's going to be spurred by an Instagram post that I actually skimmed briefly, then moved elsewhere due to my lack of focus. So naturally, it went into the stratosphere and I lost it forever. However, what I did see highlighted some important points for me as a northerner, and I think something that others can definitely learn from as well. And those are, um, I guess we'll just start with the post. It showed a woman with a frozen calf, and she was struggling to keep it warm. And if you're in the north, you know exactly what you got to do to try and get that stuff to work. And I mean, it's just coming from the severe cold that the southern U.S. and a lot of the U.S. has seen over the past couple weeks in February. The theme of the post was that listen, the South's not used to the temperatures. They're not used to these conditions because they rarely have to deal with it like those of us in the North. So,
Not the
kind of,
cold.
yeah, the cold. And so the thing was, she's like, listen, I get it, but some of you guys just need to lay off. Like, it's you're not helping, and frankly we're tired of your northern attitudes. Why? Well, these reasons. She pointed out, and I don't know if it's accurate or not across the South, but they don't have barns for warming. And we talked about this briefly before we actually started recording, but she said they don't have barns for warming calves or animals, or if those barns are equipped for it. They're not used to the ice because why would you be? And so some of the things like keeping water flowing is, I mean, that was a new lesson learned for a lot of them. And then they're just not used to snow buildup either. The South got a lot more snow than they've seen in a long time. And if you're not used to moving around in snow and getting stuff done in the snow, you got to get used to it. So, what were some of the issues with that? I mean, Texas, you can name it, but one of the big ones was rolling blackouts. Again, ice issues because again they don't normally deal with ice, so it becomes a huge issue that normally we wouldn't see as an issue, but it was for them. And then of course you pile all that on top of the snow with long-term cold. You know, they might be used to a day or two of cold, but not 2.5 weeks of cold. And now we're starting to finally get warmed up. So Dad and I talked about some of the struggles working with the cold, which will be posted in the shoot episode in the coming weeks. But I think it's an issue that specifically requires a longer, more in-depth discussion. So that's why we're doing it today. And believe it or not, there have been people on social media who have actively been rooting against those in the South and have been less than helpful. And I'm like, dude, why? On the flip side, though, what I've seen is a lot of Southerners have, like, frankly, swallowed their pride, and they're using platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and they're asking open questions, and they're like, hey, what's the best way to go about doing this? And how do you, and they've received endless support, which is super cool.
Good.
You know, people using computers and their phones, and they're messaging in there. It's a truly remarkable thing.
Helping them
Because
out.
yeah, and it's you're putting a, not even the farmer or the rancher first, you're putting the livestock first, which is awesome.
Right.
Um, so why is this an important topic? Because even those of us in the north or who are used to the north have been struggling a little bit with this polar vortex. Okay, so some of the items for discussion, dealing with the dangers of temperature impacts and whatnot. First of all, animal weight loss. No water. We've talked about that before. Water is always going to be key. Animals just freezing to death. Herds getting lost, which we can actually discuss some of the issues we saw. I think it was in 2015, 2016 in eastern Montana and the Dakotas. I mean, that was a heartbreaker for a lot of ranchers. And then,
Put people out of business.
yeah, and then on top of all of that, I mean, different breeds, different issues. You know, the South is used to, for the most part, they have more like longhorn cattle, which are thinner. And we've talked about this before. They're not used to these temperatures, and suddenly you throw them into sub-zero temperatures, and it throws everything for a loop. And I mean, you can talk to ranchers in the 1870s and 1880s that brought longhorns to northern Montana, and they'll tell you exactly what's going to happen when stuff like that occurs. So, with that, I'll turn it over to Dad for some of his take.
Well, that's you know, the first thing I thought of when you were talking about this, and we just spoke just barely briefly, just said that there was, a lot of activity on your Instagram deal that, frankly, sorry I don't watch, but
This
your
is
mother
actually
showed me.
Twitter, which you're not even on.
Oh,
So,
Okay, yeah, sorry. You're lucky to get me here and have the dang computer on. So, or maybe you're not lucky. I don't know. Uh, having the communications and the tech that we do now. I mean, why wouldn't you use that to help people,
Yeah.
right? I mean, for God's sakes. But you know what? When you think about this, you look at what happens politically. You know, a political figure dies and people are cheering. I
Right.
mean, what the hell?
Yeah.
You know, so to actively, jeer somebody, and don't get me wrong, hey, I'm the first one to jeer somebody or rib them a little bit, but I expect it back. I
Hmm.
mean, that's just kind of what you do, is point out that, hey, you guys don't know about this. It kind of sucks to see you fall on your butt, but then you're at the same time you're going like, okay, this is what we lived through. I hope you didn't get hurt.
Right.
Here's how you can do this. Here's how you can help. In water, you know, a couple of things come to mind with that. They don't have a barn to calve in because they don't need one.
Right.
And
Normally
and
they
we
don't. Well, we talked
no
about
and
this as well. Like, uh, the guy that I was referring to on one, he um he was telling me uh, a couple weeks ago why they were calving, because I was like, why? It's January. Why are you calving in January? And he goes, well, in Texas we got to, because if we calve when you guys calve, which is March, April timeframe, it starts getting
let's get
too
hot.
hot. I'm like,
Right.
oh, of course. And that's the difference. Like, we don't
Yeah.
think about it that way, but they do because of that reason. So why would you have a barn that needs to have warming capabilities or anything like that?
Well, and their cattle are for the most part do better there in the hot weather. The Bos Indicus
Hmm.
type cattle, southern breeds, narrower, thinner, uh, large ears for heat dissipation. All of those things that you think about, like your African animals.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about heat management.
Yep.
And for us here, our Bos Taurus cattle, heavier, thicker muscled, shorter ears, more compact animal and more dense animal. So our animals are built for this. But when you're talking about calving without having any cover, we do that. Our cattle are hardy, and we in
Mm-hmm.
a way we want them hardy. We don't put them in a big shed, and we could, uh, with a few exceptions. When I'm watching those cattle close, our heifers, first time heifers, of course, we also breed them a year later. So instead of a heifer being 2 years old and having a calf, we're breeding it to, and they calve at 3. Mental issues, they're a little more mature. They'll take that calf. Physically, they're no longer juveniles. They're more late adolescent to adult age. And so you've got bone structure, pelvises that are larger. They can pack that animal. But we still have them with the ability that they're close and I can get them inside if I have to. We don't have a heated barn. We
No.
got and we'll probably have some video at some point on this. We had some last year, but why use old stuff when you got stuff coming up? And there's no doubt we'll use it. Is a hot box, which people can build them. You can buy them. You get that animal inside of a box with a like
The
a
calf
Tarzan,
specifically, because
the
it's the
calf.
size for
Yeah.
the calf. I don't think we've got anything big enough to be for a
Oh,
cow.
you wouldn't do that for a cow. If a cow don't
Yeah.
make it, she don't make it.
Yeah.
If you're something else is going on there. Uh, we had 40 below ambient temperature with no wind. Thank God there was no wind that morning, and it was just east of the ranch. Uh, if they make it, good. If they don't, there's nothing you're going to do with a larger animal to save them anyway.
Right.
That's just the fact of it. We didn't have the ice that they do. We had snow with a little bit of ice underneath, but still we're doing two things. We're keeping water flowing, and water can flow at tremendously cold temperatures if it just can move. It's amazing what it can do now. We've got the spring that feeds the corrals and a couple of 3 pastures. It's really the heartbeat of that place. It's been there since my great great grandpa developed the well or developed the spring, and 40 below temperature, and it continues to run, and it feeds 2 stock tanks because it runs to another one with the overflow. That water stays open. Don't think I wasn't checking it, because
Right.
it was on the lower end of the longer tank, which that tank I think is 10 foot long, and narrow. It's about 3 foot 30 inches wide, probably. I guess they're about 30 inches wide. you put in the cage around it to protect it from the cows. You welded that all together out of pipe. But um, about the latter 6 foot of that tank was getting ice on it, and it was getting half inch, 3/4 of an inch thick, but it was still flowing enough that it was flowing out the outflow and then down away from the corrals. So I'm breaking up the ice so the cows can drink at that. But um, you're watching that, and that's in northern country. So one is water. You can go a few days without feeding an animal if you absolutely have to. And we've had to do that where we've had such deep snow you couldn't get out in it with a tractor, with a pickup, nothing.
Mm.
Um, the winter of 77 and 78, we go back in the Wayback Machine, but those winters, or that winter, the end of 77 and January, February, March of 88 or 78, it snowed here, and it was so unusual because we had snow piled up on the top of wood fence posts that was 18 inches tall. It was just a continue to be a cylinder up on top. That never happens here because we get wind.
No.
We're like, oh
Every
my
time you
God,
tell me that, I always think it's just a myth because
no,
like,
and it was
there's no
amazing.
such thing as no wind in Montana.
But it stayed that way for weeks. And so it was cold, a lot of snow, but no wind. Well, you can take a hell of a lot of cold with no wind. We do it all the time,
Right.
Um, but we were feeding, and the light was flat, and so you couldn't see a horizon from the ground. You just couldn't see very well.
Talk
And
about
so
snow
we're
blindness. I mean,
it's
you could be
basically, yeah, except that it doesn't hurt.
right.
Your eyes can stay open. You just can't see very
Well,
well.
that's something too.
You
Like
got no depth perception.
Southerners probably would never understand what snow blindness is. You got to be careful of that. Like, there's a
It
reason why
hurts.
people wear sunglasses in the wintertime. You know?
Yes. Yeah, there's another little story I could tell you about that some other day, but no, between another warden and I that got
Oh
caught, and
yeah.
it was dicey. But anyway, uh, we were pushing with, we had I don't know, about 45 bales. Again, at that time we were feeding with small squares. There was no such thing as a round bale.
Yeah.
And we loaded the pickup up, and we're headed out, and we had chains on this thing. And all of a sudden the pickup comes to a halt, and we couldn't figure out what. I mean, Grandpa's like, he's pushing and nothing. And it just stopped, and then it started spinning. With, oh, okay, what's going on? He backs up. We have the headlights on out there at the ranch because you could. I mean, we're trying everything we can to be able to see. He backs up, and you could see the imprint of the grill in the snow. We'd been pushing snow and didn't know it, and it stopped us. So we could not. You couldn't get those cattle. So they went a couple of days without feed. They were hitting some wherever they could find anything sticking through the ground, but I mean, it was minimal. And so we did the best we could, but we did get them feed. But one thing we did make sure, and we knew they had, was open water.
Uh-huh.
So, you can go a long time with no feed. Yeah, you can be hungry, but cold weather dehydrates you as fast and sometimes faster than heat, depending on what you're doing. You can shade up and stay pretty well, but when you're cold, and you're cold everywhere. And that dry, cold air will really wreak havoc with your body, and you go through dehydration. So the water's one issue. The second issue
Well, and I'll jump in there
that
real quick. Is that was one of the things where I noticed. I personally saw like some of the stuff on Twitter because somebody said a woman in southern Texas said I'm having to deal with ice. Something about she couldn't get the water open. Like, will the cows figure out that they can just drink this or eat the snow? And everybody jumped on and like, no, girl, you better start getting a pickaxe or something. Open that water up. And she's like, why? They don't know. I'm like, they're not gonna do the snow. You got to get that water open. And that was one of the cool things. Again, seeing everybody jump on there and they're like, hey, we'll correct you now because you're gonna lose livestock if you don't do it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah, they do the same thing. They dehydrate, but
Right.
they cannot. They go through a cycle, especially when it's cold like that. They're not used to it. It cools their body temperature down. They're using more energy to try to stay warm. Plus, that you don't get good snow or good water out of snow.
No.
If you melt it and get it, yeah, then you're drinking water again. But it takes a tremendous amount of snow. You can pack, say, a 3-gallon coffee can, pack that thing with snow, heat it, and you'll end up with just a little bit of water on the bottom. It's not got any value to it. Horses can do that to a point, but still, that's a whole different deal. Horses are even more susceptible to colic, things like that, and that's a bad deal when you've got no water. But Getting an animal out of the wind if they have any wind, and I think Texas in some areas they have a fair amount of wind. So being able to not have that wind cool that body off, getting the calf dry
Mm-hmm.
is big time. If you can dry them off, get them out of the wind, if you can get them up and suck, they're probably going to be okay. But there are times when there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to get a calf on its feet, and when he starts to get to where he doesn't care, and he's there's a thing called failure to thrive. They just got no will to live,
Mm-hmm.
and you gotta try to intervene the best you can. I mean, I've had calves on their side, and they just don't want to do anything, and they get so cold they don't care anymore. And sticking your hand inside their mouth. We had one last spring. We had a horrible storm that when those one set of twins were born, um, and there was another one right around that time. We dropped, I don't know, about 7 calves, I think, over the night, and it was touch and go. We lost one cow. She actually jumped the fence and went in with cows that had already calved, and we couldn't see her, and we're looking all over for her. Went in to find her, and then found her there, and then found her calf, froze to death. But you stick your hand inside of a calf's mouth, and it's cold to the touch. I mean, cold, and it doesn't want to open its mouth. You're close, and
Mm-hmm.
so I've milked the cow out. I don't like using replacers for milk substitutes. You can buy them. They've got all kinds of things in them, but there is nothing better than the cow's milk and the colostrum that's in that. And so I'll bring that cow in and I'll milk her, and I'll fill up. I'm not going to waste a lot, but I'll fill up a what seems to work best is a water bottle, and put a nipple on it, calf or a lamb nipple, really, because it's small enough, and you can get it in there, get that animal, and then you can actually squeeze it instead of having them suck on it, and then get some warm milk down them. And once they start to feel that you get that natural response of, oh, they want more, and get them warmed up and get them doing that, and then pretty soon, man, they take off, and then you slide them onto that cow, uh, and now you're okay. Once that calf is on its feet, wants to suck, man, you can almost turn that calf loose. Man, we've had a few of them that it's been really, really cold. They were slow going. I kept them in the barn with no heat, just getting them out of the wind, having some wood chip shavings
Mm-hmm.
down, or straw, getting them so that they're clean, dry, and got some belly full of milk. Life is good. That's all they care about at that point. And get them up, and once they're going, if I can keep them 24 hours even, and that calf is actively trying to seek out milk, and a cow stands for them, kick them out. They're going to be fine. And I've not lost one yet using that method. Sometimes I've kept them a little longer because the calf was just either a little small. We had a set of twins that, you got to kind of watch them both, because that cow can't abandon that one of them or separate them, and you still got to keep an eye on those. So I've kept those up fairly close, and maybe kept them in for a week, but I've kicked them out of the barn and made sure that that cow was taking care of both of those calves. So then if you get a cow that loses the calf, graft another calf onto her. If they'll, and usually they'll want it, they'll take it, but especially with an older cow, not the young stuff. So water, dry, and at least out of the wind. Those things, these animals are tough. They are way tougher than we give them credit for. Yet at the same time, those babies are so fragile.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's the it's the gamble, and sometimes you go, boy, should I bring them in or should I not? And uh, we've your brother Braden and I were there last year with that one set of twins. I'm like, I don't know. She's got them up. She's moving, and we watched her for a while, and she was taking care of both of them. But the one, pretty soon he'd get up, and then he'd just lay back down. He did that a couple, 2 or 3 times. We went, he's not just struggling to get up the first time, because the other one was up and moving. He's struggling, so we brought them both in, and I'm glad we did, or we probably would have lost that one. But you know, when in doubt, do what you can to keep them going.
Yeah, that's where I saw that one guy on from Texas. Was he's normally very active on Twitter, and I knew he was busy when I didn't see a lot of things coming out,
Sure.
and sure enough, like he made a little tweet, and he said this has been the hardest uh calving he's ever had to do, and in the past week and a half he got 60 calves, and trying to do that in the cold that he's not used to. He's
In
like,
a week and a half, he must have synchronized his cattle maybe too,
yeah, I think
or
so.
AI'd.
But I mean, the fact that he's doing all that in the cold in essentially unfamiliar territory, and just trying to, it's got
Wow.
to be tough. I know it's tough for us, but then to do it in that situation, it's just,
Yeah.
whew, it's tough.
Well, we're used to it. We know some tricks and what to do and how
Yeah,
to, and
exactly.
getting a cow and a calf in from a pasture is one thing too. I mean, we've got we got a little sled
Right.
that we'll drop them in there, wrap them up in a blanket or old sleeping bag. It's amazing what kind of heat those things will maintain on a calf. But at the same time, cloth, you're kind of getting them dried out a little bit or wiped down. And that, I'll tell you, that hot box is a literally, it's a lifesaver. And we've had two calves at a time in there. I mean, there's
Oh,
not a
really?
lot of room. Oh yeah,
Because you
there
got that
it's
after
about,
I left, so I haven't gotten to use
yeah,
it.
yeah. I lost some of my slave labor, so we make it a little. It's better than bringing it. And you know what? You bring them in the house, you
Yeah.
get them in a bathtub, you do whatever it takes to get them warmed back up. And uh,
Because I remember seeing
yeah,
a calf
people
one
are,
time. We showed up to the ranch, and Grandpa had a calf just laying there. I was like, "Isn't that supposed to be out there?" He's like, "Yeah, he was a little cold. I had to put him in the bathtub and get him warmed up." Like, oh,
yep,
okay.
you'll do whatever it takes. I mean, that's your livelihood. And if you can just let an animal die and knowing that you could do something about it, that makes me question your uh, I don't know, your whole being a little bit about how
Yeah.
just how
Are you a
how tough are
sociopath?
you? How
Because that's kind of where I started going down.
maybe, I mean, there are times too when you look at something, you go, "There's no hope," and I know that. That's a little bit different than knowing that you might have a chance of saving something.
Right.
I mean, and there's that point. I mean, it's a little different, but it's putting an animal down. There's sometimes it's like, okay, old age or such an injury that this animal is not going to make it.
Right.
That's one thing. But it's if there's nothing else wrong and you could maybe save it, but you choose not to, you're either really a cold individual or you're lazy, or I mean, there's other kind of issues there. Who knows? But I got to question that when you can save something, especially when you're in this industry. If you don't
Well,
know how,
I
that's
saw
maybe one thing. But
I saw a guy too that he said essentially the same thing. He goes, I've I've lost a lot of animals in my time, but I've never regretted not trying. Like you always,
yes,
as long as you try, you can fail every single time. But if you get, you get 100 calves that you've lost, and you have the potential to lose, and you only win one, he's like, that's still a win.
yeah,
You lost the 99, but you're never gonna give up on yourself, because that like you said, there's something there that you got to at least give it a chance. You can't just walk away from
right.
it.
Well, and I think it was 3-4 years ago. Your brother I was gone, and he was calving, and he hadn't had that much experience with it. I mean, some, but not very, little. And he had a calf that I think he had to pull it, I think, and it wasn't breathing, and he's trying everything, straw in the nose. I mean, he had tipped it upside down, hanging it so any fluid would come out of its mouth, lungs, and he was giving it CPR. I mean, he's breathing into its nose. He's doing everything he could for like a half hour, and and he was so mad at himself that he
Oh
didn't
yeah.
save this calf. I was like, there are some times you can't. It's not going to happen, and so you
Yeah.
just, you got to know that as well. But you know what? And I said, you know what, Bray, you probably went further with this calf than I would have, going for a half an hour like that. And I can remember
Right.
being a kid and seeing the same thing happen. And you're trying everything, and Dad and Grandpa were a little bigger than I was, obviously because I was little. And I mean, they're hanging it over a fence and letting it hang there, holding onto its legs, letting it drain, and then banging on its side, doing everything they can. And finally, after a while, he's not going to make it, and they quit. And I'm like, I'm wanting to keep going, and he's not going to make it. I mean, you get a feel for that too, but it isn't like they just said, he's laying there. I don't think he's going to make it,
Yeah. Just give
and
up.
walk away.
Yeah.
Right? That whoever said that is exactly right. You never regret trying anyway,
Yeah.
even if you've done whatever you can. So in some ways it's triage. I mean, you can be working
Right.
on one and you got something out there trying to calve and needs help. Now you got to make a choice.
Yeah. People don't understand triage. I think because we come from a world where we don't have to deal with that consequence. But when you do have to learn triage, and you actually understand it, it's not easy. But when you figure it out, I think it makes things easier to an extent, like emotionally, because then you're just like, okay, I can't there's a finite amount of resources that I can only provide. I'll give it to those that I can do the best for. And
Right.
when you get to that situation, you I think you learn a lot about yourself too, but then it just teaches you a lot more in general, because again, I don't think as Americans we're too comfortable. We have never really had to do that. There's very select amount of people that have ever had to deal with that. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And it's, and I think obviously there's more of an emotion attached to it when it's a human versus
yeah,
an animal,
yeah,
for most people too. Cause I mean, I've done CPR on people for an extended amount of time, several of us in a drowning issue. And, you know, you do everything you can and you keep going. And then you have, when professionals, they're, a flight crew shows up with a helicopter and they're doing everything they can and nothing's working. That's beyond my expertise at that point, but I'm
right,
willing to keep going whatever they want. And it wasn't a triage issue, but it did come to a matter of, I mean, I'm doing 45 minutes of CPR on somebody. That was a long time. And then we got a break and then went again. And I think total was like an hour and a half. That's an extraordinary amount of time.
yeah,
For the first 45 was before the helicopter got there. And so you're not going to quit because you can still keep going. And there were a couple of people of us that were doing that. But once they got there, we spelled off for just a few minutes, and then I went back at it again. And I think it was a total of, like I said, an hour and a half. But then when a paramedic says, you guys, we need to talk about this, and they're pushing drugs on them, they're doing everything they can. It's the same thing, same concept. And he says, I think we need to talk about this. Is everybody comfortable with this? And I'm like, being around animals, and a human is just an animal. I mean, you
yeah,
think of them in those terms, it's the body system.
mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I don't think he's come. This isn't gonna happen. I know what kind of
Right.
brain damage is
Oh
occurred
yeah,
after an hour and a
that's
half.
I was gonna say that's the big thing is at that point, they could come back, but then they're gonna be a vegetable for the rest of their life because
Right. And
they won't be
so
there.
right. Well, and the weird part of that was we all agreed that yeah, that was okay. And family was there, and they're like, yeah. And so that was easy, you know, for me because I was not the one in charge. I'm just,
Mm, yep.
but you could tell even that flight nurse, he had done this countless times, and he was a well-known guy around here. I mean, total respect for him. And when that happens and you call it, then the guy all of a sudden he starts getting heart rhythm again. You're like, oh my god! So we package him up and they get him to town, but they kept him alive, but he was brain dead, so
Yeah.
they did do it. But same concept. If there had been multiple people on that, he probably would not have gotten the attention he got after so much time if the other ones needed it and looked like they're in better shape. I mean that is the choice. That's what triage is. And you talk to any ER group, you know, they deal with that all the time.
Right.
Uh, you in what you do in your medical services with the Army, your medics are trained to do that. Your docs, your nurses. I mean, I'm sure you
Oh
guys
yeah.
do a lot of training. I did that when I was an EMT at that level. We did a lot of training on triage.
Oh yeah. I mean,
You're
a lot
always
of
going
it.
to get judged whether you did it
Oh
right or
yeah,
not.
100%. The hardest part is and this is how we always have to do it, justification. And I think this relates to a farm and a ranch actually pretty well is your resources. I mean,
Yeah.
if it, we can have state of the art equipment, which we do as Americans, but if we don't have the resources to back it up, I can't help you. So,
Correct.
I can have 50 tourniquets, and if I can guarantee that I can use all 50 tourniquets to save 50 people because I just need one per person, then I'll do it. But if I have to then turn around and provide 50 tourniquets to one person, does that really make sense? You know what I mean? Because they've been so ravaged, their body's been destroyed so badly that they got to use up the majority of my supplies. And that's the easiest way to kind of explain it to people, because when you put it in terms of resources, I can save, and realistically it'd be more like, 6 or 8 tourniquets. I can
Right.
save 6 or 8 guys or gals versus focusing on one person. I can save 6 or 8. That's where you have to make those choices. Now, have I even in training, because I fortunately I've never had to do it in real life, but in training, did I get constantly berated by senior officers because that's the decision we made. Yeah.
Yep.
You're an infantry guy and you're going to judge me on my way to support you. Okay. I see. I understand. That's where I stand. I get really jaded about that, but we are doing the best we can, just like farmers and ranchers are with their animals. And you can't judge somebody. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. It
Right.
really is, and it irritates me. And that's when somebody says, whatever it is, hey, this is what I'm doing, and this is why I did it. They're like, did you try this? And they're like, oh no, I didn't think about that. I'm like, okay, I will provide a potential solution or a comment to the side, but I'm never going to judge you on it because I don't know what was going on in that situation. If
You
I
should
don't know
ask
what's going on in the
questions.
situation, then I
Right.
can't be there
That's
to.
right. Yeah, well, and you should, if you're going over that as a debriefing, or like us, okay, did you try this? What all did you do? Help me understand what your circumstances
Mhm.
were, so I can go, okay. And you're like, you know what? Sounds like you did everything you could to me. Like when your brother with that calf,
Yeah.
he was so upset with himself that he didn't save it. Thought I was going to chew his butt. And I'm like, no, you went above and beyond. It sounds like you did everything you could.
Yeah.
You'll never hear me complain about that. And there is something along those lines too, where you can ask a question. Hey, did you try this? Because this has worked for me. That's a learning moment. That is a debriefing type of question after the fact. Say somebody can learn from that, or no, we couldn't do that because of, hey, okay, understand that works. But never ever complain about something without having a solution to it. Now, you may not know the entire totality of what's going on, and you
Yeah.
think that solution is viable, but then you'll learn at that time, oh, couldn't do that because of that. Okay, hey, never, ever complain to anybody or bitch about something or say you could have without having a better solution to it.
Mhm. Well, and
And I
sometimes
don't think you should ever, because you're not in
sometimes
that moment.
these resources aren't always just physical either. Resources are also in your head. You
True.
know, if you're not experienced enough or you've just not done it enough repetitions, like that's my lack of resource. I was unable to make this decision because I just didn't know. A lot
Right.
of people, and unfortunately, this is where I dig on the Army, and I don't know if it's like that in other branches. I'm sure it is, but that's not acceptable to people, and I think that's wrong because how else are you going to learn? You're trying to say that you're supposed to have no defects. There's always going to be defects. Just because I don't understand how to do rocket science, why would you
Yeah.
expect me to just show up to NASA one day and know everything? Like the the amount of information I know on medical operations and how to support and how to supply and stuff like that has been over the course of 4 years and struggling by myself on a lot of it. It's not because I just knew it one day. And that's where
Well,
I think that's one of my biggest issues with when it comes to anything, particularly the Army, but anything is when people say, I can't accept that answer because you didn't know. Well, I didn't know. I don't know how else to get that across, that is a finite resource in that sense.
well, and we always try to learn in the moment, teach in the
Hmm.
moment as things come up on a
Right.
farm or ranch.
Yeah.
That's what we do, because you can talk about something like, say, oh yeah, hey, I saw this one time, and we can talk about things ahead of time without them being there. You maybe stick that in the back of your mind, but most of our stuff happens in real time. And any organization that I've ever been involved with or worked with, yeah, they value training. Training is, oh, we got to have this training. They talk it to death, but then when it comes down to it, training is a time waster for them and a resource of money, and they don't want to do it. And whenever they do it, they only want to allow so much time to do it. So any
Right.
training that I've had outside of the law enforcement academy, because they did do that, and it was all on, that was a curriculum. And of course, they're wanting to stretch that out because they want to stay in business as a, and be funded. But outside of that, and it was still with that course, um, all that information is being compressed, and you're drinking through a fire hose
Oh
on
yeah.
every training I've ever had anywhere. So um,
Well, there's
you
difference
can,
between getting talked at or looking at stuff on a slide versus also doing it too. And I think that's where you're
yes,
kind of going is we
yeah.
can talk about it and we'll sit at the dinner table and kind of plan something out. But then it changes once you get your hands on it and you start, oh, yep, you're right. This is where I should put that pipe. This is how I should weld it.
Right.
Just simple things like that.
Well, and ailments come up with animals that you normally don't see, and I hadn't seen anything for years and years and years. A thing called water belly. in typically steers, and most is steers because of the urinary tract, the way it runs, and they get to where they just can't pee, and they get these big bellies on them, and it's like you can do surgery on them, to which now you're looking at another issue is like, okay, I can do an expensive surgery. They can reroute the urethra. This animal can then just kind of dribble expensive surgery that costs more than the animal. If this is a steer that's going to market, okay, what do? You put them down.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may not see that, but you know about it. You know what causes it. You know what the implications of it are. So you can make that decision at that time, but you can also talk about it ahead of time. Say, hey, this is what to look for. I mean, there's a lot of things that like what to look for. Your grandpa was asking my grandpa, my mom's dad, his father-in-law, one time, sat him down and he says, God, tell me everything you know about cattle. I mean, and
Okay,
you think about
let
that,
me pull 50 years out of my hat here.
or generations of
Yeah.
knowledge that's passed down too, right?
Yeah.
It's not just yours, it's others and other people. So, and my grandpa says, sure, what do you want to know?
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And you don't know what somebody else. So,
and that's what happens with to tie it to the military. People ask me medical stuff, like medical questions. I'm like, okay, what do you want? Like, what are you looking
right.
at? And so like I had a friend when I first got here to Knox. She's a commander, and she wanted to learn about a medical review process that the military, the Department of Defense goes through. And I was like, okay, I've got 3 years of experience behind this. What do you want to know? I got products, like I can show you timelines, and she didn't even know where to start. So I gave her an overview, and then I said, okay, now where do you want to start? And then we funneled it down to what they needed to see, her and her
Right.
and her senior enlisted advisor. But I think it's the same way. Is another thing is you talk about water belly, but sarcoids.
Yeah.
I don't think you until we had that one colt with him, you'd never seen those before, had you?
No, I had not.
So that was something that you knew of,
Yep.
but you'd never seen it until you physically saw it. And I
Right.
consider myself fortunate because I've seen two things that are rare now: water belly and sarcoids, and I can probably diagnose them if I were to see them again. I'm like, oh
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
I know what that is. Definitely the sarcoids. The water belly is still a little hard, I think, but you just got to pay attention and see what's going on. But
Yeah, that's why, I mean, you got to look your animals over, and you're doing a once over on everybody all the time. One of the things I think in some of the medical training I had as an EMT, which is again, that's just a first responder. It's what you can do with your hands and some oxygen and a few tools, right?
yeah,
But in your case, when they have even more tools, it's not any different because most of the stuff you're dealing with is either a medical issue or a trauma.
yeah,
And they always look at, and this is where I'm tying this back a little bit, is weather is a secondary ailment or something that you need to protect from. You can't control it, but you can control a little bit of the environment
right.
by getting out of it or changing it, or getting
Protecting
in,
you.
in someplace warm or someplace cool, depending on what's going on. So that's always a secondary thing. With cattle, that's a primary.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that you're looking for. It's going to happen, and it is a primary driver uh, for death or for ailments. I mean, you can get a lot of water in the spring, um, lots of rain, and cause issues as well. So calving when it's raining, that you get an animal again wet and
Right.
soaked, and they can develop pneumonia pretty easy. I mean, there's all
Well,
kinds of
and
stuff that can go
ice.
on.
I mean, you talk about
Ice,
ice
yeah,
too. Like
yeah,
it's not just slippery and dangerous for us two-legged creatures. It's also slippery and dangerous for the four-legged as well, because
yeah,
they'll slip. And I think you and mom talked about a cow that you thought had aborted at one point because she slipped and fell. And it's
yeah.
a thing because it's not only dangerous for the cow because they could break a leg or break a hip depending on how hard it is or what they fall on, because sometimes the ice isn't always smooth. It's also jagged, and that's what causes the other issue. But then it's also dangerous for the life that they're carrying too. And so there's those things that you got to, if you can, you try and mitigate it. Well, what did we do? We tried to reroute some water, make it better. So it did help, but it was also oh well, okay, it's gonna be a summer project now. It
Right.
turns into
Well,
stuff like that.
and I grabbed the tractor and a bucket full of dirt, manure, everything that I could possibly scrape off of frozen ground,
Hmm.
and I laid it out on that crossing where they were at, where they were already crossing, and tried to get them to use that, and they did successfully. Of course, cows are wherever they're walking, they're dropping poop, and it
Yep.
helped create more, and that work made a little causeway there for them to go. But um, you don't think of that at the time, but again, you think about things that, okay, what do I need to do? What could I do? Is there something that I can change or make happen that's going to uh, in the future possibly, and I mean I'm talking future like tomorrow or this afternoon, if I do this, what else am I going to need to do? What would make this easier? How can I do this?
Hmm.
And that sled, those when those sleds come out, that's pretty handy. um
Well, and the nice
and
thing about those is you can either hand pull them if you need to, or throw it on the back of the four wheeler or the side by side. Or worst case scenario, you got to get your feed pickup, put it on the ball hitch, and just
right,
slowly drag it, go 5 miles an hour, and you're good. It's
or
handy.
you drag it with a horse and
Yeah.
behind you. The whole issue is, and it's not like just grabbing the calf and taking it in someplace. That's one thing, you can do that. Now what are you going to do with a cow that's out there, can't find her calf and knows where
Right.
it was at and doesn't want
Yeah.
to leave? So you got to be able to bring them both in. You've got that calf, and this is where that kind of comes handy on that sled. Or how many times have you had, or we've all done this, been on the back of the pickup holding onto a calf while somebody else is driving, and the cow's looking around, and cows can be so stupid. You can be so smart when you don't want them to be,
And
but
there I am in the
stupid.
back, just trying to
Right,
get
you're
get
bawling
its
like a
attention.
calf, and they pick their heads up and they come at you, and they get it close enough. You let them sniff the calf, and they're like,
Yep.
"Oh, there it
Oh,
is,"
there it
and
is.
you
Yep.
start driving, and then pretty soon they're like, "Where'd my
Where'd it
calf
go?
go?" I mean, they're like, "Oh, you're an idiot," you know.
Uh,
So you're bawling like a calf to try to get them to come,
I've
and
totally
because
done that. That's not an exaggeration,
oh
folks.
yeah,
We have done that.
and we've done that multiple times. So yeah,
Uh,
I like that sled because she can smell it. You're away from her a little bit, where
yeah,
because there's
protection
some
for you.
cows you don't want to get close to,
Hmm.
their calf, and that's a good thing. They're protective of that babe. However, um, you still got to get her and the calf in, and so if they can keep that calf laying down in that sled, and usually if they're poor enough, they're going to stay there. But I've also
Right.
had calves that are like, okay, we got to get them in because this bad thing is going to happen. You could see the future here in the next 4 to 6 hours. We got to get this calf in. And the calf is like, no, don't want to do this, and stands up and jumps out or falls out. I mean, so you got a little pig and string, and you hog tie him real quick, lay him in there. I
Uh,
mean, the whole thing is a damn clown show.
oh, it
Sometimes it
is.
seems like.
That's where we need more fit. We need more footage because I think people would
No,
appreciate it.
I
You
don't
would be
want
cussing
footage of
up a
that.
storm. You would be cussing up a storm, but I guarantee people would be laughing and they'd be like, "Oh, that sucks."
Well, it does suck, but here's the problem. And here's what happens. Things like this do come up, and the last thing I'm thinking about is a
Just
damn
filming it.
camera.
Yeah, yeah. That's
It's
why we
like,
need a
no, I
dedicated
ain't got time
cameraman.
for this. I need to get this done. So, I almost recently with this cold snap, we had 198 hours of below zero weather, which even for us is a good amount of time. The problem with it is a lot of that, some of that weather was well into the 30 below mark.
Hmm.
So we had a hydraulic hose fail on the tractor, and
Right.
I just got done plowing out the neighbor, kind of plowed out our yard a little bit, and was putting it away. And I jumped out of the tractor, shut everything down, didn't know anything different because I couldn't hear it. Everything was working fine. And I climbed down out of that tractor, and I look, and it's hydraulic oil is just puking down out of the middle. I'm like, what the hell? So I told Braden, I said, let's get your pickup. We got to get this out of here. We got to get everything moved. And we did. We got it in the shop and try to find it. Well, good luck. I thought we were going to take the stupid cab off that tractor, but all while I was doing that was like, oh wait, you should probably be filming this. So then I went back and I showed where the trail was. I didn't show the actual puking out of the tractor, but
Yeah.
and then you started in on that. But I mean, this all takes time, and sometimes time is of the essence.
Oh yeah.
That's the issue.
Well, and
It's like,
especially with
okay,
with animals like what you're talking about, you're trying to get them.
right
You got a couple hours. A couple hours is a lot of time. Most of the time, it's I got a couple minutes.
now,
We got to get them in, and now, yeah.
or we're getting it to it, and it's already almost too late, or it could be too late.
Right.
I mean, That's why I'm neurotic about checking our cattle, and especially during calving. I worry about it, and I just I make a last pass with enough daylight, or I'm checking them and I'm going, okay, this cow's getting close. Maybe we'd ought to bring her in. Or you see one that's struggling, it's like, okay, I got to get her in. If she hasn't, you can see that she's starting to calve and she hasn't calved within an hour. That's a long time. Get her in. We may have to pull this calf, and you can't always tell whether the calf's upside or backwards or forward,
Right.
based on their most of the time you can, based on what the hooves look like when they're coming out of the cow. But
Well, and that's
um,
something too. Is I saw this actually 2 3 weeks ago on Twitter. There was a guy that he snapped a photo, and it was literally a calf dangling out of the cow, and it was clearly the hind end coming out. And he's like, "Oh God!" And he put on there. He just did a quick snap. He said, "This is gonna be a long day," because I mean it was early. It was bright early, and come to find out, he made a small thread, and he goes, "Well, I went back to go get some tools, implements to help me pull this calf. Next thing I know, the calf's right there. It was standing up, and I mean that fast. He was gone for a couple minutes. It come out completely just fine. It stood up, and it was trying to get its sea legs. And
yeah,
his comment, he explained the whole thing, and he goes, "I think there's a lot more calves that come backwards than we think, and it just
totally
happens
agree.
to be that we get lucky a lot of the times." I'm like, "Yeah, you're probably right."
Completely agree. I think that's exactly right. We have more calves born backwards than we realize. If it was hanging out, and the hips were showing, yeah,
Yeah,
it's going to happen. I worry about those hips getting caught. Or the one thing I'm looking at is always how many feet are hanging out. How many feet do we
yeah.
have? We got one or two out there. If you got 2 feet, oh, we'll be okay. It's less complicated. It may be still a complication, but less complicated. Another one I just thought of, and uh, Rose Riley asked about this not too long ago
Mhm.
on the Facebook deal. Asked if we'd ever heard of a dummy calf. I'm like, oh yeah, dummy calf syndrome. We haven't had it in a long, long time. But a calf will be born, and I think sometimes, particularly after you've pulled a calf, and if it's backwards, I think there is and this is just me, um, that calf going through the birth canal squeezes. You're squeezing the entire body, and I think that stimulates that calf to start breathing on its own. And so it going backwards doesn't always, or when you have to pull a calf, doesn't always allow the amount of time, and sometimes too much time, I mean, to kind of make that natural reset of that body's ability to breathe, not through a bloodstream, but now through actual lung use. And so you'll get and we just called them a dummy calf. Uh, but I don't think you guys have seen one yet. I mean, we've been very, very lucky. Dummy calf syndrome, where that calf is laying there breathing, but it won't get up. It's limp. And it's almost like it's about like a failure to thrive, that kind of a syndrome, where we used to make sure it was actually breathing. It just wouldn't get up. It's limp. It's just laying there. It still thinks it's in the birth canal, or in the amniotic sac inside the cow. And so we would, I mean, like, shock this thing, pick it up and kind of let it hit the ground, just drop it,
Mhm.
just pick it up in the center and throw it down, or
Like
slap it hard.
as if she had been standing up when she birthed it or something like that.
Well, usually when you pull it,
Yeah.
like pulling it backwards.
Mhm.
So there is a deal you can use, and I have not yet been able to do it. A guy come up with, I mean, the vet came up with it, which is really a great idea, and that's where this theory is derived from, and why I think it's maybe from pulling calves backwards, or struggling. You wrap a kind of like how you would tie a manti. Take a rope and tie it around their girth, tighten it down, and throw a couple of half hitches on there, and you tighten it way down, because what are you gonna do? You're not gonna hurt it, and it's still breathing, and you squeeze them tight, let it go, and give them, you do that for like 15, 20 minutes, and then let it go, see if they come around. And a lot of times those calves will come back around by squeezing that and contracting, holding that chest cavity, and then expanding it. But again, in cold weather, what are you looking at? So you may or may not have that thing
Do you think that has anything to
to
do with
do.
like a neurological impact too? Like maybe like,
Well, yeah, I think it's a brain reset or a brain set. It's changing from one breathing method to another, and I think when you squeeze that chest cavity as that calf is coming out, I think that kind of stimulates that lung or use of that lung. But I think mentally the calf doesn't even know they're doing that. They're breathing because it's an autonomic nervous system type activity when you breathe, but they're like, I'm still hearing this nice warm thing, and
hmm.
even though they're laying there, it's like they're just a dumb calf, and that's why it come from is dummy calf syndrome. So I mean, it happens. I hope we don't have one. In a way, I'd like to see it, but I can do it. But then there's always that risk. Oh crap, this isn't going to work. I'm going to lose this calf.
Yeah, the interesting stuff is the stuff that we really don't want because it means there's probably something that's not good going on.
Right. Yeah.
uh,
So there's always those kinds of things happening. But yeah, I feel really bad for those folks in the South right now.
the
And
one thing
it's
that they're not thankfully having to deal with is, and this is kind of something I wanted to touch on uh, briefly, is the things that we saw in, I think it was 15, 16 with eastern Montana and what in the West Dakotas was um,
and Nebraska had got hit hard too in
did
that.
Nebraska? Because I
Yeah.
remember that region specifically because the snow buildup, which thankfully I don't think the South has seen a lot of it. They have seen snow buildup, but not to that extent because there were herds that were literally lost. And you want to talk about
Right.
trying to get
Covered.
into water and stuff? They were drifted in. I mean, you want to talk about an actual fence? This is a fence made out of snow and ice, and they couldn't get to water or feed, and they lost thousands of head of cattle.
Well, and they'll get down into a coulee to try to get out of the wind, and then
And they
the
block
snow
them
will
in.
cover over the top of them. They suffocate.
Yep. Yep. That's just something that people aren't used to, and when they see it, they're like, "Oh crap!" And so, what's the first thing that people start thinking of, especially us? Of like, okay, clear a path, try and figure out a way to get them a path to water or a path to food.
Right.
But
Well,
it's
and one of the things that I've noticed, and I think the priority is correct. Is that they're worried about people and heat and
mm-hmm.
all of these sorts of things and water, and they're boiling water now to get some electricity back, which is, yeah, you got to do that. I mean, but when you hear the news reports, I don't hear much about cattle and livestock. I just don't hear anything about it.
You do in
Now, when
Montana. Elsewhere, like the big mainstream stuff, you're not going to hear it.
no, no, that's right. But like what happened in what you're referencing in 15 or 16, you didn't have that many issues with people because we're used to living in this thing. And so
Yeah.
even the national news had like thousands of head of cattle are suffocated, and it was like a big surprise to them. It's like, well, yeah, but you didn't hear that much because there were a few people that probably slid off a road, got caught out in it. Yeah, they and died tragically. But that happens every year with us, and we just don't get any coverage on that kind of
Right.
stuff. But when you have that many cattle, I mean, that's kind of how that focus shifts a little bit. So it's amazing. Right now, we're going to lose a lot of snow. We started losing it yesterday. It warmed up. I think I saw a high of 36. So the snow is going to start moving fast, and we're going to get a Chinook, which is a Indian word for snow eater in this part of the country. And it's, you get a warm weather, 35, 38 to 40. Usually you figure like 40 uh, degrees, and then a 20, 30, 40-mile-an-hour wind, and that snow just disappears. It's called snow eater. And so the problem then is now we've got water going everywhere on the top
Yep.
of frozen ground. It doesn't go in. So you have flash floods. You got water sitting out everywhere. So I'm getting up, and we're going early in the morning to feed, so that we are free, are hopefully cooling off at night enough that it's going to be just a layer of light ice or firmed up the mud a little bit, so we can get fed and then get off the ground. Otherwise, you'd start tearing up your pastures, and it's bad enough with the cows feeding on it,
Right.
but I still want those cows, to be fed. So
Or you get stuck
that's
on
an issue.
accident.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. You get stuck. I remember a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, we had a lot of wind, and it drifted in the well pasture along the fence. You drive up through there, and there's a kind of a swale. You come out. Well, that thing just drifted full, and so I was driving out around that because you couldn't get through. You couldn't even get through with a tractor. That two-wheel drive tractor we had at the time,
Yeah.
And so you're just out driving around it and as close as you can and starting to make some ruts. And every time I drive through, I'm like, oh God, and towards the end of the year, we had others that were out wanting to check cattle and they're driving out there on, when it was raining, like, please don't do that. You're going to make ruts. And I kindly got told, well, you were driving off the road. Yeah, you weren't there when the drift was there. So, so we're dealing with that. You're going to be dealing with that right now. We're going
Yep.
to have that issue where we're going to have water everywhere if we don't have much mud because it can't sink in, it can't go in, but we're filling reservoirs, which is always a good important thing, and that happening. But I'm just glad we're not calving yet. We got another about 3 weeks before we start calving, and now it's going to be doing everything you can. I'm just hoping we have this weather that we had in December to calve in. My
Oh yeah,
God,
that
it
was
was
good weather.
fantastic.
I was hoping to have
You don't
snow
have to
when
worry
I was
about.
home, and there wasn't any.
Oh yeah, you don't have to worry about that. No, it was dry. It was, well, then we start worrying about, oh God, now it's going to be too dry. We're never satisfied. We are absolutely never satisfied with the weather because we can't control it.
Right.
And so it's either too cold, too hot, too dry, or too wet. I never complain. You never hear me complain about too much rain. Sometimes I go, ooh, a lot of rain, but I'm not, it's like whoever's cooking in cow camp. Well, these beans are salty. They're good, but they're salty, because whoever complains has to cook. So it's that kind of a deal too with the weather.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Well, I think the big thing is our hearts and prayers and everything go out to those in the South. We hope they keep doing well. By the time this posts, everything they should be in a much better position because it'll be warmer and hopefully their calving season will be coming to an end. So I hope everybody, at least on their end, is doing well and it all turned out for them. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Dad.
All right. Yeah, I echo that same thing, and I'm glad that people can help other people who've never experienced that. I mean, having this technology like that is something that we never had. I mean,
Oh yeah,
it was all anecdotal over somebody at a coffee table in
or
a
bar.
restaurant, in a bar. Yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, I could try that maybe, or or somebody will say something, or we had telephones and somebody say, hey, I got a problem here,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of things become common knowledge, but if you're not from that part of the country where that happens and you're at home, you've already done all of the things that you think you can do and you don't know. And it's like that water, keeping that water open. That's
Yep.
so important. So people helping each other out that's a really good thing, and I'm glad to hear that. So I guess with that, we will thank you till you're better paid.